All right, are we good to go?
Yeah, we're good to go.
All right, are we good to go?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Welcome, everyone. Let me just make sure that I've got my screen set up here. So today we're going to be talking about how to set up a customer acquisition strategy. So I'm going to switch over. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment box, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. All right, so this is about getting the customer acquisition strategy right for your startup. So a quick background about me. My name is David. I do marketing here at HubSpot in Singapore. And previously I worked at a e-commerce startup here in Singapore called Furl Candy. And my previous background also was in video games and in other B2B sales. So pretty much I've done marketing all across the map. And some of these companies are very huge and unicorn level. Some of these are also at the startup stage. So I've pretty much seen what marketing looks like from the early stage all the way up to the big company level. And along the way in all throughout my marketing career, I've seen certain aspects of what a good customer acquisition strategy looks like. And so it's from these experiences I want to share with you how to start setting up your customer acquisition strategy. Quick background about HubSpot for those of you who might not have heard of us. Essentially, we're a growth platform for businesses. So we do marketing, sales, and CRM software. You can check us out in more detail if you go to HubSpot.com. We're also a global company with many customers around the globe. So we can definitely talk more about that. If you guys have any questions about HubSpot, happy to chat about that further. Okay, so let's get to the topic at hand, which is really how do you get customers for your startup? So maybe at this point you've gotten your product live, or you've gotten one or two people, maybe you've even got a couple of dozen paying customers for your company. The question then becomes, how do you start scaling that up? Which tactics do you action on? What plays do you run? Which best practices do you listen to? At some point, once you've started to taste product market fit, the question goes away from the risk is nobody's going to use the product or the company or the app that I'm developing, but it then becomes, how do I become a scalable customer acquisition machine? And here's what most startups do. So they know how to get the early customers, try to get the first traffic to the website, and then they turn to the internet, and the internet is full of advice and best practices, right? So here's the things they do. They're going to start a blog, or they're going to look into hiring an SEO consultant. They're going to hear about everybody's favorite buzzword, growth hacking, and they're probably going to get a growth hacker on board. Or they're going to get a salesperson. So maybe the CEO, the early founders say, you know what, we're not good at the sales thing. We don't know what we're doing when it comes to customer acquisition. Let's hire a salesperson, outsource that function to them, and let them figure it out. Or they'll get into some really technical tactics like A/B testing, or they're going to do crazy things like testing and optimization of their email nurture flow and just follow this rabbit hole of optimization down. So this is what most startups do. They do like a random hodgepodge of different tactics and plays to try to get the customer acquisition going. But it's not so much that. It's not about building a giant list of things to do for marketing to bring customers into your startup. There's so many best practices out there, and you're just going to go crazy trying to keep up with the latest thing to do. Or maybe you found another company that's similar to yours, found a guest post about them, or found an article about them that talks about the early days of their startup, and then you just decide to copy that. And the problem with that is, the internet is full of growth hacks. The internet is full of case studies. The internet is full of all these stories of different companies and how they grew. So when you're trying to build a customer acquisition strategy, you're trying to figure out how to get customers for your startup. It can get very, very confusing. You're inundated with information. And as all of us who read, I'm sure, most of these publications in the tech scene, you're constantly reading these, and there's just tons of stuff to digest and filter through, and you don't know what to do. So it's not so much you need to come up with the latest and greatest technique, or you need to figure out the latest and greatest marketing tactic. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. All you really need is a plan to put all these things together so you can have a way to figure out what the most important priority it is you need to do for your customer acquisition strategy. So it's a framework. It's not about coming up with 100 tactics you'd have to invent. It's about how do those 100 different tactics boil down into the 5 things I need to work on, into what makes sense for my startup, into what doesn't make sense for my startup. And the way that I think about that is from this blog post by a VC called Christoph Jans. So he's one of the early investors in Zendesk, and definitely saw that company grow from nothing, from like 3 Danish guys in a room, to more than $100 million business, into now one of the biggest SMB SaaS companies ever. And so he released a blog post that really helps you figure out a customer acquisition strategy. So this is how he thinks about the business models that can lead to a $100 million business. And so if you think about your company and you think about the customers of your company, this starts to come together in a way that allows you to make sense of all those tactics, right? So is your company somebody that goes after elephants, meaning that you're going after a small number of customers that have a high amount of revenue per year? So they're big and slow sales processes, but when you land them, when you successfully hunt them, your company is going to be very well fed for a very long time. Or are they hunting deer, which is smaller than an elephant, but certainly a little easier to hunt, and there's more of them. But you can't be as fed for as long of a time as an elephant, so you're going to need to capture more deer. And this analogy trickles down all the way down to flies, where flies you can capture in a big swath, but you have to capture a lot of them in order to feed yourself. So it allows you to categorize where your business might be. Are you hunting elephants? Are you hunting deer? Hunting rabbits, mice, or flies? And as we see in the next couple of slides, you're going to see how this distills down into a customer acquisition strategy that's going to make sense for your business and allow you to filter all those best practices into a framework that's going to help you grow your business. So on top of the strategy, we can overlay another framework that's called Spears, Nets, and Seeds. And this is from Aaron Ross, which is one of the early sales guys at Salesforce. So he thought about the different types of marketing and customer acquisition techniques that you would use depending on the type of customer that you're hunting. So you can just imagine that these two analogies overlay very, very neatly. If you're hunting elephants, really large enterprises, large multinationals, governments, if it's an elephant, you're going to hunt them with a spear. And so just think about how you would hunt with a spear, right? It's a very human intensive process. It's going to take a long time. It's probably going to take multiple throws of that spear. But when you make sure that the spear hits your target, then it's going to be a long, intensive process, because it's not like you throw one spear and then it's over. You're going to have to go down there, probably get up close to the animal, and then close the deal, so to speak. And then all the way down to nets. So you wouldn't hunt a rabbit, which is a smaller type of customer, with a spear. It's just too time consuming. So maybe you can capture them in a scale way, so that you would use nets for that. All the way down to seeds. So you definitely wouldn't use spears to capture flies. You wouldn't use nets to capture flies, but you might use seeds to capture them. So these are very cheap. You can use a lot of these to capture a large part of the market at once. And this allows you to capture the type of customer that you're after. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to translate these into some tactics we might recognize, and then I'll translate these animals into other companies we might recognize. So if you're a startup right now and you're trying to think about, how do I apply this framework to my business? Think about the type of customer that most likely resembles the company that I'm about to show you. All right, so elephants. So a company that's hunting elephants, that's Salesforce. Company that's hunting deer, that's HubSpot. Zero is somebody who's hunting rabbits. If you notice that the type of customer, the average dollar revenue per year is decreasing, right? So at Salesforce, they don't have as many customers as Facebook, but the customers they do have pay them a lot of money. All the way down to Facebook, they don't have customers that pay them hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars a year, but they have billions of customers who each average out to, let's say, $1 or $2 per customer. So you can then try to figure out, which does my company look like? Does your company look like a Salesforce, in that you are looking for really big enterprises or companies that have a long sales cycle? Does your company look more like a Zero, where you're going after smaller companies, SMBs? Or is it like a Dropbox or a Facebook, where maybe you're like an app, or you have a SaaS platform that's going after B2C? Which one of these closely resembles your business? And that's going to inform which acquisition strategy you're going to go after. So spears, what does that look like in marketing tactic terms? It's really about prospecting. It's about sales. Again, just like throwing a spear, it's very human involved. There's a lot of effort involved in that. And it's probably going to take multiple tries. So you can imagine somebody sending like cold emails, or you flying out to your customers on site and trying to close them in a meeting, talking to executives, taking them out to dinners, very human intensive. HubSpot is a mix of spears and nets. So we do have a sales force, we have a sales process, but we also do a lot through inbound. So inbound marketing is trying to reach people at scale. So that's why if you guys search for anything related to marketing, you are bound to trip over some kind of HubSpot blog post just because we have such a strong SEO presence, and that allows us to execute our customer acquisition strategy. Down through zero. So if your company looks like zero, it's basically selling to small businesses, maybe sub 20 people, and you're trying to reach a lot of them. So your acquisition strategy is not going to involve a heavy sales force. It's going to involve a lot of blogging, a lot of partnerships, agencies, and being very good at things like SEO and pay-per-click advertising. So Zero's very good at Facebook advertising. They're really good at Google SEM because that's what it takes for them to succeed and thrive in the market. And all the way down to Dropbox and Facebook. So it's very freemium, very reliant on word of mouth because they have to. There's no way you could grow a business of their size purely with a human selling process. It's just not possible. And so they have to rely on a lot of virality. So Dropbox, very famous for their referral program, and Facebook, of course, one of the poster children of virality and word of mouth. So try to think about where you fit into that strategy. And let's go a bit deeper into each of these. So again, Salesforce, HubSpot, what does that look like? Salesforce, very, very deep into the sales process. They do cold emails. They put on giant conferences. They do big banner ads, big branding campaigns because it's very human intensive. And they know that they're selling to a very small segment of the market of decision makers. And they've done that very well. So Salesforce is well beyond the $100 million range and now I think in the 10 billion ARR range. So it just goes to show you what happens when you execute your strategy perfectly, along with, of course, a best-in-class product. Same thing with HubSpot. This is why we're so crazy about blogging, content marketing strategy. It's because it allows us to reach a huge part of the market without having a human attached to every sale and selling motion. Down to Zero. So for those of you who use Zero, they're very, very much involved through the partner channel. So hooking up with accounting agencies and financial services agencies and selling Zero through them. So they don't have to have a giant sales presence, but they make sure that the people they do have access to, they're the ones doing the marketing for them. So they're giving them affiliate commissions, they're making sure they're taking care of their partner channel and making sure that they're getting a lot of value as being a part of the Zero ecosystem. And again, Dropbox and Facebook. So if you're in gaming, if you're doing some sort of B2C app, there's a lot you can learn from the customer acquisition strategies of Dropbox. So this is like, how do you create word of mouth for your app? How do you make sure that every new install that you get, every new user that you get will result in another user at the other end when they go through your onboarding or your install acquisition process? All right, and here's a shot for that as a recap. So here's a takeaway, and here's the idea that I want you guys to walk away with. So decide what animal that you're after. So here's one thing that you should not do, right? Think that you are going after the enterprise, but then try to run word of mouth referral programs. It just doesn't work that way. You're focusing on the wrong acquisition strategy and you're going to spin your wheels and waste a lot of time and money that way. It's the same thing. If you have a B2C app, or maybe you're in a gaming company, it's a mistake for you to have a very strong sales-heavy process as your primary customer acquisition strategy. It's just not going to work. So you have to make sure that you know which animal you're hunting, which company you look like, and then model what these guys are doing because they're doing the best in class for each of these respective business models and these respective customer acquisition strategies. And hunt the smart way. All right, so we're about to take questions. Quick shout out to HubSpot. For those of you who are interested in learning more, we potentially have 50% off for you if you go to hubspot.com/startups. We have a startup program where we give significant discounts for folks who are in startups and qualified accelerators. So come check that out if you're interested in learning more about HubSpot. All right, so at this point, I'm going to switch over and take a look at some questions. All right, folks, taking a look at the blog post for top 100. Okay, let's go to the very bottom so I make sure I hit you guys. All right, question from Daryl. Everyone is so reliant on digital channels, predominantly social media and email marketing. Is offline and mainstream media still relevant? Oh, Definitely relevant. I think it's a mistake for everybody to think that it's just all about digital now and moving all the dollars to that. I think it goes back to the presentation that I just did. It really depends on the type of customer that you're going after. If you're going after the enterprise, um, they might, depending on the type of customer that you're going after, maybe they exclusively respond to things like billboards and conferences and TV ads. It really depends on who you're going after. There's no one right, there's no one magic bullet customer acquisition channel. There's no one right marketing tactic. It all depends on the animal that you're hunting and the right way to hunt them. How does a customer acquisition strategy differ for a B2C product versus B2B product? I don't think that at a high level, there's a huge difference. I think it comes down to more the persona that you're after. So it's not so much that B2C and B2B are completely different worlds. I think the tactics are different, but the strategy is pretty much the same. You get somebody's attention, you find a way to turn that attention into interest into your the problem that you're solving, and then from there you get them further down into considering your product as the way to solve that problem. What are some best practices to facilitate a seamless workflow between marketing and sales? So there's not a one easy answer for this. I think the best marketing and sales teams that I've seen, how they work together, they just make sure they over communicate. And let me flip it around. How do you make sure that marketing and sales have a terrible relationship? And the way to do that is they don't communicate. They're not aligned in terms of their goals. So marketing is going after marketing's goals, sales is going after their goals, and there's no overlap in between. So I think you just flip that question around, and what you end up with is figuring out how to make sure there's over communication, constant alignment, and making sure that everybody's marching in the same direction. Another question, what is a good first step for marketing? If I'm still at the coffee shop level, I have no money, and it's just me and a business partner, how do I even get our name out there? I think the key thing here is to not set your goal as being a household name. So if you're the coffee shop level, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's a lot of advantages, and the advantage is going to come from you deciding who you're going after. There's a great book called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore, and it's a great read about setting up a customer acquisition strategy for startups. And the main takeaway there is focus on the niche that you can serve better than anybody. Start from there, and then once you have a core group of very loyal followers, that's going to allow you to leapfrog into other segments. So if you're at the coffee shop level, don't have a lot of money, focus on who you can serve disproportionately better than other companies, and then go from there. What are some best ways for a company to think about customer acquisition in the long run to build brand, especially when they're starting out? What are some best practices and some things they shouldn't do? All right, so question is, there's actually 3 questions in that. Best ways for companies to build a brand. Okay. So Bill Masitis, who's the CMO, former CMO of Slack and former CMO of Zendesk, has a great quote on this. And he basically says that brand is not about your logo. It's not about your color scheme, not about your tone of voice. It's not about the type of ads that you run. Brand is really the sum of all interactions you have with a company. So customer service is part of your brand, sales is part of your brand, and of course, all the marketing touch points that somebody interacts with pre-sale, that's part of the brand. But I think the way, a very useful and sustainable way to think about it is just every part of your customer experience is part of the brand. So I hope that made sense. I'm happy to follow up on that if that wasn't clear. Common pitfalls that you see companies make all the time. I think it just goes back to that hunting analogy. So some people, they're going after SMBs. They're a SaaS startup that maybe has a product in the price range of like $50 to $100, but then they employ very sales-heavy strategies. So they do outbound email, they're doing things like sponsoring conferences, and it's just not a fit for the animal they're trying to hunt. All right. What would be a good time to market my startup? Ideation stage to increase brand awareness, validation stage to onboard customers. I think there's this question actually, there's a false assumption in this question that says there's a good time and a bad time to market your startup. I think that there is no perfect time. You just start doing it as soon as the idea is out of your mind and into the real world. The worst thing you can do is you can create a product, or you start doing your startup, and then don't tell anybody about it until the product is live. That's just a terrible mistake that a lot of companies have done. And the problem there is you've missed the opportunity to create a following or to create demand for your startup. So there's no good or bad time. As soon as you have the idea and you decided that you're going to run with it, start telling people about it, get people excited about it, build a list, build a following. That way, when it is ready, you already have an audience that's ready to buy into your message. Next question from Ashley Mark. Which do you find more challenging, introduction to new customers or retention of existing customers? For example, if I sell shoes that are meant for male teens and I want to market to their dads, okay, and then a bunch of detail about that. There's no universal answer for this, and every business is going to be different. And I hate giving that answer, but it really does depend. So some companies and some businesses and some founders and some teams are going to be more adept at getting customers than keeping them. And so it's just a matter of which one is more important to the business. It is possible for there to be a situation where you care more about just getting people in the door and you don't really care so much about retention. But the flip side is also true. It just depends on your industry. Maybe you care more about keeping customers than getting new customers. So for example, goes back to that hunting analogy that I had. If you're going after the giant enterprise customers, it's a very painful and long process to acquire those guys. And so you want to make sure that you're keeping them because it's very bad for your business. Let's say you have $10 million a year in revenue, but it's coming from 2 customers, then it's going to be very important for you to come up with ways to keep those 2 customers happy. So in that case, it's retention that's very important. On the flip side, if you're like a Dropbox or you're a Facebook or you're just a mass B2C company, maybe introduction to new customers is important because of competitive factors. Maybe there's other people who are vying for those same customer mindshare that is going to be very valuable for you. So yes, no easy answers, unfortunately. All right, let me get to another question. Do you think companies focus too much on acquiring new customers to the point they're neglecting existing customers? So same kind of question. Yeah, so same thing. It just depends on the company and depends on your competitive situation as well. So think about like a Grab versus Uber. They can afford not to have great retention just because they know they can buy customers to come back through discounts, through word of mouth, through branding, things like that. All right. I work with an early stage startup, and it's hard for them to find the right channel to reach their customers. I would like to know, what do you think are the main barriers for people to plan and implement? Aha. All right. So there's a question from Joao Dutra. So this goes exactly to the presentation that I just did. How do you know what channel you're going to use to reach your customers? Pick the animal that you're hunting. Pick the type of customer that you're going after. And then if you don't know which tactic to go after, well, look to what Salesforce is doing. If you're going after enterprise, if you're going after large, small businesses, then look to what HubSpot is doing. If you're going after really small businesses, then Xero has a great strategy with PPC, SEO, and agencies and partners and building that ecosystem out all the way down to Facebook and Dropbox. So if you're a startup that is dealing with a mass market, then it's important for you to get good at virality and word of mouth. All right, next question. David, is it advisable to target multiple user types or focus on one at a time? Okay, I'm going to assume this question means, is it good to target multiple audiences at once or just focus on one at a time? Then if that was the right way to interpret your question, then basically it is very simple. Go after one market at a time, really nail that, understand that market inside out, and make sure that you are investing your resources accordingly, especially in the early stage. You can't afford to spread your resources too thinly. What is your thought about the buzzword growth hacking? We could probably spend 30 minutes on this question alone. Growth hacking is essentially useful when you're dealing with a customer base that's in like the hundreds of thousands to the millions, because if you don't have a customer base of that size, it's not the right tactic. It's not the right timing for you to use that tactic, just because the incremental gains are not going to be useful. Next question. We are a B2B solution company for the independent hotel industry. The number of clients should be like a rabbit or rat. Cool. As our solution is to help them solve their coming problem, what's the best way to let them know they must do something now to prevent the future problem? Okay, so it's great that you've identified that your target customer is like a rabbit or rat. And the strategies that line up very well with that type of animal is SEO, content, PPC, and anything that allows you to reach them at scale. So you're going to need a lot of content marketing. So maybe that means you spinning up a blog, or depending on the type of customer that you have, maybe it's a YouTube page, maybe it's SlideShare. Basically, you want to create content that reaches them at scale, and then getting it out to them that way. That allows you to then figure out the type of messaging that you're going to spread to them. So if you're going to let them know about a future problem, that having a blog allows you to educate them in that way, and then they're going to get into your ecosystem and fall further down your funnel as you educate them. All right. I think there's another question here. How do you seek and search for new customers who are in the traditional industry, supply chain, goods, distribution, etc.? I'm not too sure what this question means, but let me try to rephrase it. How do you seek and search for new customers who are in the traditional industry? So, okay. I think the question is asking, you're going after people who might not use Facebook regularly, who are not on Twitter, who maybe don't search for things on Google regularly. In that case, it's really simple. Well, it's simple but not easy. So you would look for somebody who is your target customer. Let's say it's somebody in the supply chain business, and maybe somebody who's a bit furthermore developed in their career, but doesn't have any of the online habits that the millennials and Gen Z have. Find that person, set up a meeting with them, and build a persona around your target customer. So this person, I would ask them, what are your media consumption habits? Where do you get your news? What influences the decisions that you make? Who do you go to for advice? Start to build out a profile of where that person gets the information, and then work backwards in how you can influence those networks to put your company in that conversation. So if they're a very traditional industry, they might say, well, I have industry associations that I'm a part of, or I read this particular magazine, or I go to this conference twice a year. So going into that is going to allow you to figure out how to reach them. The question is not so much how do I reach these guys through Facebook or what kind of blog do I set up, but it's really going down to the customer level and trying to figure out from an interview basis, how do I reach this person and get that information straight from them. All right, I think as the last question on the blog post, I'm going to take a quick sip of water here. If the E27 folks see any questions that I don't, please flag them. All right, here's another one. What do you recommend about acquiring customers that are not tech savvy? So this again, nail down who exactly you're going after. So let's say it's somebody who's not working in a traditional, who is working in a traditional business. Let's just say they run a factory and they don't go online to get the information. Well, you would then want to talk to somebody who fits the profile of somebody that you're going after, interview them, figure out where they get the information from, what influences the decisions that they make, who they talk to for advice, and start to build a profile around what influences them. And then you can start to figure out, working backwards from there, how to influence those networks and how to get into the circle of decision making. Yeah, tech savvy is not a blocker. In fact, I think that's a huge opportunity because that just means you have that much less competition. Because a lot of people are I've had success where you email somebody and they're just happy to talk to somebody who wants to listen to the problems they're having in that industry. You'd be surprised the response rate you get with an email that's like, hey, quick question about your business, or quick question about your industry. People are typically happy to jump on a 15 to 20-minute call if they know it's not going to take up too much of their time. All right, people. That's all the questions I'm seeing. I'll maybe hang back for a minute or two just to let people catch up. I'm going to throw the animals and hunting slide back on screen so we can see that. Another question, is it advisable to target multiple user types to focus on one at a time? Oh, so I think this is a recap of the other question. But basically, figure out who your core target market is or your target persona is, go after them, and fully invest in that one target persona, and then use the momentum you gain from that target group to leapfrog into other segments. So practical example, let's say that you're a new company and that you're going after, you could go after, let's say, restaurant owners or gym owners. Maybe you want to go after both because you think both benefit from your product. Well, you would first think about who is most likely to get the most value from your product or who's easier to go after. So you would rank them in that way. And then put a lot of effort into acquiring that type of customer, get a lot of momentum, get all the case studies, get all the word of mouth referrals you can exhaust from that segment, and then start to attack adjacent segments or different people who can get value from your product. All right, everyone, we're going to wrap up here. Hope that this was really valuable. Again, just want to make sure that for those of you who are startups or you may qualify for the HubSpot for Startups program, check that out. Make sure you're going to hubspot.com/startup to see what that's all about. You could potentially get 50% off HubSpot. All the details are there. But if you have any questions, let me know. You can tweet me at DaveVelocity, which is my Twitter handle. But otherwise, thanks for hanging out. Hope this was useful, and hope you guys keep in touch. Take care.
All right, so thanks so much, David, and I think we'll be wrapping it up here. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning into the broadcast. If you guys have any questions, do tweet David. David at DaveVelocity, or just maybe leave some of your questions in the next few articles that we'll be having, so that David can answer in the next AMA. Thank you so much for tuning in.